Robert Harrison leaned back in his $15,000 Italian leather chair, watching through the 23rd floor window as the human ants scurried through Chicago streets that practically belonged to him. In 30 minutes, he would close the £50 million contract. In 30 minutes, he would be untouchable. Then she appeared. Sarah entered with her worn thermal bag, her trembling hands searching for the wrong office. Just another invisible delivery worker in a world of marble and power. Robert looked at her the way one looks at an insect in a crystal glass. "These people have no education," he murmured in English to his British investors, certain the woman wouldn't understand the insult hidden in his tone. Sarah stopped. Her eyes lifted from the floor for the first time, and with perfect pronunciation, more elegant than the CEO's own, she responded, "Sir, I believe you're mistaken." His arrogant smile froze on his face like cracked ice. The British investors dropped their briefcases to the floor. Robert felt his legs turn to jelly because that invisible delivery worker had just spoken with the most perfect diction he'd heard in his life. And her eyes were no longer those of a frightened employee. They were the eyes of someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose because what Sarah had buried for 15 years of silence was about to surface and destroy that man's life forever. If you're moved by stories that touch the soul, those that make you believe in the value of the invisible, subscribe to this channel. Every week we share stories that heal, inspire, and restore hope. Don't miss them. The morning of March 15th arrived at Chicago's financial district with a different air. The cold wind off Lake Michigan slipped between the glass panels of the 23rd floor, where Robert Harrison adjusted his Italian tie in front of his office mirror. His English leather shoes gleamed as brightly as his ego. Robert wasn't just the CEO of Harrison International. He was the man who had transformed a small family construction company into a $500 million empire. His grey eyes, cold as the steel he sold, reflected an ambition that knew no limits. That morning, everything had to be perfect. The British investors from London would arrive in 2 hours to sign the most important international contract of his career. £50 million to build a luxury resort complex in the Hamptons, his passport to the global elite. He headed toward the main conference room. His steps echoed on the imported marble, each footfall a reminder of his power. Employees lowered their heads when they saw him pass. Some whispered, others simply held their breath. Robert had built his empire on a simple philosophy. People were divided into two groups: those who served and those who commanded. He had been born to command. His personal assistant, Tyler, waited by the glass door of the conference room. The 28-year-old had worked for him for 3 years and had learned to read every gesture, every look, every change in his boss's tone of voice. "Everything ready, Tyler?" asked Robert without looking at him, while reviewing documents on his tablet. "Yes, Mr. Harrison. The contracts are in English and French. The presentation turned out perfect. The investors will arrive at 11 sharp." Robert smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who knew he had already won before starting the game. He entered the conference room. The mahogany table gleamed under the LED lights. 6 black leather chairs awaited the British investors. In the background, the panoramic view of Chicago stretched to the lakefront. Everything was calculated to impress. Robert sat at the head. That was his place. It had always been his place. He reviewed the presentation on his laptop once more. Every number, every chart, every projection had been designed to seduce. The British couldn't resist. No one resisted Robert Harrison. His phone vibrated. A message from his accountant. "Everything confirmed. The money will be available this afternoon." Perfect. In 6 hours, he would be £50 million richer. In 6 months, he would be building his first project on the East Coast. In a year, everyone would know that Robert Harrison was no longer just a successful Chicago businessman. He would be an international magnate. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He looked out the window, down at the streets where common people walked hurriedly to their common jobs, with their common lives. From that height, people looked like ants. So be it, he murmured to himself. He didn't know that morning one of those ants was about to climb up to his tower. A woman invisible to him, but who carried a past so powerful it could shake the foundations of everything he had built. But that morning, something he could never have imagined was already walking toward his conference room. Sarah Martinez adjusted the thermal backpack and looked at the address on her phone once more. Chicago Financial District, 23rd floor. The order was clear: 2 avocado and ham sandwiches, 2 black coffees, for office 2304. Her hands, weathered by years of work, trembled slightly as she pressed the elevator button. It wasn't nervousness. It was the exhaustion of having started her workday at 5 in the morning after only 4 hours of sleep. Sarah was 43 years old, but her face bore the marks of a life that had been much more complex than anyone could imagine. Her brown eyes, deep and melancholic, had seen things she preferred not to remember. Her chestnut hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail, framed a face that had once known much better days. The elevator climbed slowly. In the reflection of the polished metal, she saw herself, the faded blue uniform of the delivery app, comfortable but worn shoes, the backpack she'd carried for 2 years. She was invisible to the world, just another delivery worker in a city full of people working to survive. But Sarah kept secrets, secrets that slept in her heart like ashes from a fire that had once burned very bright. She reached the 23rd floor. The elevator doors opened, and she found herself in a marble hallway that gleamed like a mirror. Everything was elegance and power. She felt small, out of place, like a stain on a perfect painting. She walked slowly, looking for office 2304. Her steps could barely be heard on the marble. She passed offices with glass doors, where elegant men and women talked on phones or typed on computers that seemed from the future. Nobody looked at her. To them, she didn't exist. She reached the end of the hallway. There it was, a double-glass door with golden letters reading, "Main Conference Room." But there was no number. She approached and read the small sign beside it. "Private meeting. Do not disturb." Sarah frowned. Could it be there? She checked her phone. The address said 2304, but she didn't see any number on that door. Maybe she had gotten the wrong hallway. She looked through the glass. Inside, there was an elegant man, alone, reviewing documents on a laptop. He wore a suit that probably cost more than she earned in 3 months. His posture was that of someone accustomed to having the world revolve around him. Sarah hesitated. Maybe she could ask him where office 2304 was. It would just take a second. She knocked softly on the glass door. The man looked up, annoyed. His grey eyes settled on her with a coldness that made her shudder. He looked her up and down, as if she were an insect that had appeared on his dining table. Robert couldn't believe what he was seeing. A delivery worker. There, in his conference room. Half an hour before the most important meeting of his life. He got up abruptly and walked to the door. He opened it with a sharp movement. "What are you doing here?" he snapped without greeting. Sarah felt the blow of his voice like a slap. She instinctively lowered her gaze. "Excuse me, sir. I'm looking for office 2304. I have a food delivery." 2304? That office is on the floor below. Can't you read? Don't you see this is a private room? Robert's voice rose with each word. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with shame. "I'm very sorry, sir. I got the wrong floor. I'm leaving now." She turned around, but Robert wasn't finished. "Wait!" he shouted. "How the hell did you get up here? Who let you up? This is a restricted area." Sarah stopped, but didn't turn around. Her hands gripped the backpack straps. "The security guard gave me access, sir. I have the order receipt." "What incompetence!" roared Robert. "It can't be that just anyone walks in here like it's their home." At that moment, the elevator doors opened. 3 elegant men, dressed in perfectly tailored dark suits, stepped out. They were the British investors. They had arrived 15 minutes earlier than expected. Robert saw them, and his face transformed. Fury became a forced smile. But the British had already witnessed the scene. They had already seen the CEO shouting at a delivery worker. "Messrs. Wilson, Thompson and Clark," said Robert in his best English, walking toward them with open arms. "What a pleasure to have you here. Sorry for this small inconvenience." The 3 Britons greeted politely, but their gazes were directed toward Sarah, who remained motionless near the conference room door. "Everything all right, Mr. Harrison?" asked James Mitchell, the group's leader with a refined London accent. "Perfectly," replied Robert, then turned to Sarah with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss, you can leave now. We have important matters to attend to." Sarah nodded and walked toward the elevator. But before reaching it, she heard something that stopped her cold. Robert, thinking she wouldn't understand the subtle insult, said to the investors in a condescending tone, "Sorry for the interruption. Just a domestic worker. These people have no education." The words fell like stones in Sarah's chest. These people, as if she were from another species. She stopped in front of the elevator. Her hands trembled as she pressed the button. The doors opened, but she didn't enter. Something had broken inside her, and something else, much more powerful, had begun to awaken, and without anyone noticing, that delivery worker was about to break everything by simply opening her mouth. Sarah turned around. Her steps were no longer those of a frightened woman. She walked slowly toward the conference room, where the 4 men continued talking, oblivious to the approaching storm. "Excuse me, gentlemen," she said with a clear, firm voice. The 4 men turned toward her. Robert frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "Miss, I already told you that." "Mr. Harrison," Sarah interrupted, pronouncing each syllable perfectly, "I believe there's an error in your presentation." Silence fell like a hammer. James Mitchell opened his eyes wide. The other 2 investors looked at each other, speechless. Robert felt the air escape from his lungs. "Sorry, what did you say?" he stammered. Sarah walked slowly toward the conference table. She was no longer the shy delivery worker who had entered by mistake. Her posture was erect, elegant. Her movements had a grace she hadn't shown before. "I said there's an error in your presentation, Mr. Harrison," she repeated, maintaining perfect composure. "On page 12, you mentioned that the project will be located on the exclusive Hamptons coastline near Montauk. But according to the documents you just showed, the actual location is in Southampton." James Mitchell approached the laptop and reviewed the presentation. His face gradually transformed. "Good God, she's right," he murmured. Robert remained paralyzed. How the hell had a delivery worker detected an error he himself had overlooked, and how did she speak with such precision? "Excuse me," said Robert, trying to regain control, "but you have no right to review private documents of—" "Sir," Sarah interrupted again, now addressing James Mitchell directly with fluent speech. "I also noticed that the contract mentions the company has ISO 14001 certification for environmental projects. Could you verify that information?" James exchanged a worried look with his colleagues. "Mr. Harrison," asked James, "do you have that certification?" Robert began to sweat. They didn't have that certification. He had lied in the contract, thinking the British wouldn't notice. "Well, we're in the process of obtaining it," he stuttered. "In process isn't the same as having it," said Sarah, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "In Britain, that's considered contract fraud." The 3 British investors began gathering their documents. "Mr. Harrison," said James coldly, "I think we need time to review all this information more carefully." "Wait!" shouted Robert. "You can't leave! This contract is perfect! This woman doesn't know what she's talking about!" Sarah walked to the window. She looked down at the city that stretched below, where thousands of people worked honestly to survive. "Mr. Harrison," she said without turning around, "there's something you should know about me." Her voice had changed. It was no longer soft or timid. It had the weight of someone who had lived many lives. "For 15 years I worked as an official interpreter at the British consulate in Chicago. I translated contracts, trade agreements, legal documents, until—" She turned around. Her eyes shone with a mixture of pain and determination. "Until I decided to do the right thing." Robert felt his legs trembling. Because what she was about to tell was a past so real, so painful, that no one dared interrupt her. Sarah walked to the head of the conference table. She took off her thermal backpack and placed it on the leather chair where minutes before Robert had felt like king of the world. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she began, addressing the British investors. "But for 15 years, I was known as Sarah Mitchell Martinez, official interpreter certified by Northwestern University." James Mitchell startled upon hearing his surname. "Mitchell?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I married Michael Martinez in London in 2004. I worked for the British consulate here in Chicago from 2005 to 2009. Robert collapsed into a chair, his face growing paler. "Michael Martinez," murmured James. "The commercial attaché who was murdered," Sarah completed with a firm voice, "for denouncing a corruption scheme involving fraudulent contracts between American and British companies." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah continued, her voice heavy with years of contained pain. "For 4 years, I translated dozens of contracts like the one you were about to sign. Contracts full of lies, false certifications, promises that would never be fulfilled. American businessmen who scammed European investors with the complicity of corrupt officials." She walked to the window, but her gaze was lost in the past. Michael discovered that some consulate colleagues were receiving bribes to look the other way. When he reported it, they killed him in a robbery that was never solved. James and his colleagues exchanged looks of horror. "After the funeral," Sarah continued, "I received threats. They told me if I didn't leave Chicago, I would meet the same fate as my husband. But I couldn't leave." She touched her heart with her hand. "I was 3 months pregnant." Her voice broke for the first time. "So I hid, changed my identity, left my career, my life, my dignity. I became invisible. Nobody. I worked cleaning offices at night, caring for children, delivering food. Anything so my daughter could grow up without them finding her." Robert had begun sweating profusely. His hands trembled as he tried to grab his phone. "For 15 years, said Sarah, turning toward him, "I've watched men like you, Mr. Harrison, continue doing exactly what killed my husband, cheating, lying, stealing, thinking no one is watching." She slowly approached the table where the contract documents lay. "But I do see them, because I learned to be invisible. And invisible people see everything." She took the papers and began reviewing them with the expertise of someone who had done this thousands of times. "False environmental certification," she murmured, marking the document with a pen. "Non-existent construction permits, insurance that doesn't cover the declared amounts." Each mark she made was like a stab to Robert's chest. "And here," she said, pointing to a clause in small print, "the real trap. If the project fails, the British investors lose all their money, but the American company keeps the land and construction rights." James approached and read the clause. His face turned red with anger. "This is theft," he exclaimed. Sarah nodded. "My husband died trying to prevent exactly this type of scam." She turned toward Robert, who had shrunk in his chair like a scolded child. "Do you know how many single mothers like me have had to work invisible jobs to survive, while men like you become millionaires by stealing?" she asked, with a calm that was more frightening than any scream. "Do you know how many families have lost their life savings by trusting contracts like this?" Robert tried to speak, but no words came out. I didn't know." I mean, you didn't know? Sarah interrupted. You didn't know the certification was false. You didn't know the permits didn't exist, or you didn't know you would be discovered. The British investors had begun gathering all their documents. Miss Martinez, said James with respect, could we count on you to review all these documents? Obviously, we cannot proceed with this contract. Sarah looked at the three of them. In her eyes was something they hadn't seen in years. Hope. You could, she replied, but I have conditions. But the most surprising thing wasn't what they had taken from her. It was what she had decided to do, with everything she had left. Sarah stood tall before the three British investors. For the first time in 15 years, she wasn't an invisible woman. She was the professional she had once been, the woman Michael had loved, the mother who had fought in silence to protect her daughter. My conditions are simple, she said, with a voice that filled the entire room. First, I want Mr. Harrison to publicly admit that this contract was fraudulent. Robert sprang up like a spring. That's impossible. You can't come here and destroy my company with unfounded accusations. Unfounded? Asked Sarah, lifting the documents. Do you want me to read to these gentlemen the letter from your own lawyer, where he admits the environmental certification will be obtained eventually? Robert was speechless. That letter was confidential. How the hell had she gotten it? James approached Sarah. Do you have more evidence? Sarah took out her old scratched cell phone. She pressed the screen a few times. I have recordings, she said simply. All color drained from Robert's face. Recordings of what? He asked with a trembling voice. From the day I delivered food to your office 3 weeks ago, when you told your partner over the phone that the British are so naive they'll believe anything. Robert felt the world collapse beneath his feet. I also have the recording of when you told your accountant that with the British money we can buy coastal land before they realize the project isn't viable. The British investors looked at each other with faces of disgust and fury. How? Stammered Robert. Invisible people are invisible, Mr. Harrison. No one notices when a delivery worker stays a few extra minutes organizing food. No one lowers their voice when there's a domestic worker cleaning. You talk as if we were furniture. Sarah walked around the table with the confidence of someone who had finally recovered her power. My second condition, she continued, is that you donate the equivalent of the £50 million you plan to steal to a foundation for immigrant mothers in vulnerable situations. You're crazy, shouted Robert. I don't have £50 million. No, but you have properties worth that amount. Your house in Gold Coast, your apartment in Lincoln Park, your 2 luxury cars. Robert looked at her with horror. She knew too much. How do you know? Because for 2 years, I've delivered food to your house. I've seen your bills. I've heard your wife complain on the phone about how much you spend on luxuries while others don't have enough to eat. She stopped in front of him. My third condition is that you publish a public apology in all the newspapers acknowledging that you've treated your service employees like garbage. Never, roared Robert, recovering some of his arrogance. You're nobody to demand anything from me. You're just a delivery worker. The silence that followed was devastating. James Mitchell approached Robert. Mr. Harrison, he said in icy English, this simple delivery worker just saved us from losing £50 million, and you just confessed to us that you indeed planned to scam us. No, that's not what I meant. Oh, no, Sarah intervened. Then what did you mean when you shouted at me half an hour ago that I was just a domestic worker with no education? Robert opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. Miss Martinez, said James, completely ignoring Robert, would you be willing to work with us as a consultant? We need someone who can review our Latin American contracts and prevent this from happening again. Sarah smiled for the first time all morning. It wasn't a smile of revenge, it was a smile of hope. Yes, she replied, but with one more condition. She walked to the window and pointed down at the streets where thousands of people worked honestly. I want part of my job to be identifying businessmen like Mr. Harrison and making sure they can't continue stealing from working people. Robert collapsed in his chair. What's going to happen to my company? He murmured. Sarah approached him. Her voice was no longer harsh. It was the voice of someone who had suffered so much that she no longer needed to punish others to feel better. Your company can survive, Mr. Harrison, but you'll have to learn to work honestly, and you'll have to learn to treat people with respect. And if I refuse, Sarah lifted her phone, then these recordings go to the police, the media, and all your other international partners. Robert remained silent for a long minute. Finally, he looked up. What do you need me to do? And just when it seemed everything would calm down, Sarah made a proposal that would change everything forever. 6 months after Emma's presentation, Sarah Martinez walked through the halls of Chicago's financial district with steps that echoed differently. She no longer carried the worn thermal backpack or the blue delivery uniform. She wore an elegant suit but not ostentatious. Her shoes were comfortable but quality. Her hair was still pulled back in a simple ponytail, but now it shone with the confidence of someone who had reclaimed her place in the world. In her new office on the 21st floor, there was a golden plaque that read, Sarah Martinez, Director of Corporate Ethics and Social Responsibility. That day she had a special meeting. James Mitchell had flown from London to see the results of the project they had started together. Good morning, Sarah, James greeted her when he entered her office. Good morning, James, she replied with a warm smile. Ready to see what we've accomplished? James sat across from her desk. In the past 6 months, Sarah had transformed not only Robert's company, but the entire way British investors operated in Latin America. The numbers are incredible, said James, reviewing a report. Since you implemented the ethics verification program, we've identified fraud worth over £200 million throughout the region. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained serious. The recovered money is important, James, but what excites me most is this. She showed him a folder full of photographs. The Brave Mothers Foundation has already helped over 300 immigrant families, women who, like me, had lost everything but had children to protect. James flipped through the photos. Women with their children, graduating from training programs, opening small businesses, smiling with hope they didn't have before. And Robert? Asked James. How has he reacted to all these changes? Sarah sighed. At first he resisted. A lot. He tried to sabotage the program, to convince other businessmen that I was a threat. And now? Now, I think he's learning. Slowly. He's started treating his employees better. He even hired 3 single mothers from the Foundation for Administrative Jobs. James smiled. You know what impresses me most about you, Sarah? What? That you didn't seek revenge. You sought justice, and there's a huge difference. Sarah got up and walked to the window. From her office, she could see the streets where she had worked as a delivery worker for 2 years. Revenge would have been easy, James. Destroying Robert, closing his company, ruining his life. But that wouldn't have helped any of the families that need help. Instead, you made him part of the solution. Exactly. Now he pays out of his own pocket an important part of the foundation. And every time he treats an employee badly, he remembers that I'm watching. James laughed. It must be very uncomfortable for him. It's necessary, said Sarah firmly. Powerful men only change when they realize they can no longer hide behind their power. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. Come in, said Sarah. A 17-year-old girl entered, beautiful and elegant, with the same deep brown eyes as her mother. Mom, sorry for interrupting. I just came to remind you that the presentation is at 3. James stood up. This is your daughter. Yes, said Sarah with pride. James, meet Emma. Emma, this is James Mitchell, the British investor I've told you about. Emma approached and shook James's hand. Nice to meet you, Mr. Mitchell. My mum has told me a lot about you. Thank you for giving her the opportunity to change so many lives. James was impressed by the young woman's maturity and elegance. The presentation? He asked. Sarah smiled mysteriously. Oh, yes. Emma is presenting her graduation project at school today. She's going to talk about women entrepreneurs who overcame adversity. And you're going to talk about your mom? Asked James. Emma looked at her mother with shining eyes. I'm going to talk about the bravest woman I know. The one who lost everything, became invisible for years, but never lost her dignity. Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. The one who taught me that it doesn't matter how low you fall in life. You can always get up if you remember who you really are, Emma continued. Emma, Sarah murmured, and I'm going to talk about how my mom not only got up, but decided to use her wounds to heal other women's wounds. James also had moist eyes. Sarah, he told her, I think your work here is creating something much bigger than we imagined. Sarah hugged her daughter. Yes, she whispered, it's creating hope. But neither she nor the CEO imagined that within their own company, a silent betrayal was already brewing. 3 weeks after Emma's presentation, Sarah arrived at her office as she did every morning at 7:30. But something was different. The atmosphere felt tense, as if a storm was about to break. Her assistant, Jessica, one of the single mothers she had hired from the foundation, was waiting for her with a worried face. Sarah, I need to tell you something, she said quietly, closing the door behind her. What's wrong, Jessica? Last night I stayed working late. I heard Mr. Harrison talking on the phone in his office with someone. Sarah sat at her desk and indicated for Jessica to sit as well. And? He was furious. He said he was tired of an upstart controlling his company, that he had to find a way to get rid of you. Sarah felt a chill in her stomach, but remained calm. Did you hear anything more specific? Yes. He said he had hired a private investigator to look for something he could use against you, and that he had a meeting today with the board of directors to put things in their place. Sarah remained silent for a moment. She had expected this to happen sooner or later. Men like Robert didn't really change. They just pretended to change until they found an opportunity to return to their old ways. Thank you for telling me, Jessica. Do you know what time the meeting is? At 10, in the main conference room. Sarah looked at her watch. It was 8 in the morning. She had 2 hours to prepare. Jessica, I need you to do something for me. Call James Mitchell in London. Tell him I need to speak with him urgently. While Jessica made the call, Sarah opened her computer and began reviewing all the files she had compiled during the past 6 months. If Robert wanted war, he would have it. But he didn't know who he was messing with. At 9:50, Sarah walked toward the main conference room. She carried a folder under her arm and a serene expression that hid the storm raging inside her. Outside the room, she met Tyler, Robert's assistant, who looked uncomfortable. "Good morning, Tyler," she greeted him. "Good morning, Mrs. Sarah. I'm sorry for what's going to happen in there." Sarah put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, Tyler. Everything's going to be fine." She opened the door and entered. Inside were Robert and 5 members of the board of directors. All men, all over 50, all with faces that clearly said they had come to fire her. "Ah, Sarah," said Robert with a fake smile. "Good that you arrived. Please sit down." Sarah sat in the only available chair, which was strategically located at the other end of the table, as if she were a defendant before a tribunal. "Sarah," Robert began, adopting a paternalistic tone that made her feel nauseous. "We've been reviewing your work during these past months." "Oh, really?" she replied calmly. "Yes, and while we recognize you've made some interesting contributions, we think maybe you've exceeded your responsibilities." I'm one of the directors. A bald, chubby man named Maurice Herrera cleared his throat. Mrs. Martinez, we've received reports that you've been, let's say, interfering in decisions that don't correspond to you. Could you be more specific? Asked Sarah. Robert smiled maliciously. For example, the fact that you've rejected 3 very lucrative international contracts under the pretext that they were ethically questionable. It wasn't a pretext. They were fraudulent. I have complete documentation. That's your opinion, intervened another director, but you don't have the authority to make those decisions unilaterally. Sarah leaned back in her chair. I understand. And what's your proposal? Robert stood up. We think it would be better for everyone if you return to a more appropriate role for your level of experience. What does that mean? A position in the Human Resources Department, something related to employee welfare. Of course, with a corresponding salary reduction. Silence filled the room. Sarah slowly stood up. You know what, gentlemen? You're right. Robert blinked, surprised. Excuse me? You're right that I've exceeded my responsibilities, Sarah continued with a smile that made them nervous. I've exceeded the responsibilities you expected me to have. She opened her folder. For example, when I discovered that Mr. Maurice here had been diverting funds from the foundation to his personal account. Maurice turned pale. That's a lie. Sarah took out some documents. Are these bank statements a lie, Mr. Maurice? Are these false invoices a lie? Robert tried to intervene. Sarah, this is... Or when I discovered, she continued, ignoring him, that Mr. Robert here has been using the company to launder money from other activities. Shut up, roared Robert. Should I shut up? Asked Sarah, her voice rising for the first time. Like I shut up for 15 years while you trampled working people? Like I shut up when they killed my husband for telling the truth? She stood up and walked around the table. Gentlemen, you don't understand who I am. I'm not the scared delivery worker who entered here by mistake 6 months ago. Get out of here, shouted Robert. You're fired. At that moment, the door opened. James Mitchell entered, accompanied by 2 men in dark suits who were clearly lawyers. Sorry for the interruption, gentlemen, said James with a cold smile, but I think we need to talk. And that night, in front of everyone, Sarah prepared something that would leave no one indifferent. That same afternoon, in the main auditorium of Chicago's Sheraton Hotel, over 200 people gathered for the annual ceremony of the Brave Mothers Foundation. It was an event Sarah had organized to recognize women who had managed to overcome adversity and build new lives for their families. But no one knew this night would be different. James Mitchell had brought not only his lawyers, but also a group of European investors and international media representatives. The morning meeting had ended with Robert and 3 directors being arrested for fraud and money laundering. Sarah took the stage wearing an elegant navy blue dress. She was no longer the invisible delivery worker, nor the executive trying to fit into a world of powerful men. She was simply herself, a woman who had found her voice and had decided to use it. Good evening, she began, her voice resonating clear and strong throughout the auditorium. My name is Sarah Martinez. 6 months ago, very few of you knew who I was. The cameras focused on her. The journalists took notes. To most of the world, I was invisible. Just another food delivery worker running through Chicago streets with a thermal backpack on my back. In the front row, Emma watched her with eyes bright with pride. For 15 years, I hid behind that invisibility. I convinced myself it was safer to be nobody than to risk being someone. She paused, looking at all the women in the auditorium who had lived similar stories. But something changed the day I decided to speak. The day I realized my silence didn't protect me. But it did protect the men who took advantage of women like us. The applause began timidly, but kept growing. This foundation was born from a promise I made to my dead husband, that someday women like us would no longer have to choose between our dignity and our children's survival. In the auditorium were domestic workers, delivery drivers, office workers, immigrants, single mothers, all with tears in their eyes. Today I want to introduce you to some of the women who have transformed their lives in recent months. One by one they took the stage. Carmen, the cleaning woman who now had her own company. Rosa, the nanny who had opened a daycare. Patricia, the cashier who had started accounting studies. Each one told her story. Each testimony was a punch to the heart and a hug to the soul at the same time. When they finished, Sarah returned to the microphone. "But there's someone else I want you to meet tonight." She looked toward the front row. "Emma, could you come up, please?" Emma stood up, surprised. She didn't know her mother was going to call her. She walked up to the stage with trembling steps. "This is my daughter," said Sarah, embracing her. For 15 years, she lived with a mother who was afraid, a mother who hid, a mother who had forgotten who she really was. Emma took the microphone with trembling hands. I grew up watching my mom work 18 hours a day to feed us," she began with a broken voice. "I saw her come home with swollen feet, dirty clothes, sad eyes. Tears began rolling down her cheeks. And I was ashamed," she confessed. "Ashamed that my mom was just a delivery worker. Ashamed that we didn't have money. Ashamed that she wasn't like my classmates' mothers." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. But 6 months ago, my mom taught me something I'll never forget. She turned toward her mother. "She taught me that it doesn't matter what job you do. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how invisible you are to the world." Her voice grew stronger. "What matters is that you never betray who you are in your heart." The applause began, but Emma raised her hand. "My mom didn't just recover her voice. She didn't just recover her dignity. She didn't just change her own life. She looked at the entire auditorium. My mom gave me back the pride of being her daughter." She hugged Sarah tightly. "And now, when people ask me what my mom does, I no longer say she delivers food. I say she's the bravest woman I know, the one who got up from the ground, the one who decided to turn her pain into strength for other women." The entire auditorium stood up. The applause wouldn't stop. James Mitchell had tears running down his cheeks. The cameras captured every moment. But Sarah only had eyes for her daughter. "You know what's the most beautiful thing about all this, Emma?" she whispered in her ear. "What, Mom?" "That I no longer have to hide from who I am, and you'll never again have to be ashamed of who you are." The applause continued for 5 full minutes. 5 minutes in which 200 women told Sarah without words that her story was also their story. When silence finally returned, Sarah took the microphone one last time. "The foundation will continue growing. We'll keep helping more women. We'll keep denouncing men who abuse their power." She paused. "But the most important thing I want you to take away tonight is this. No matter how invisible you feel right now, no matter how lost you are, no matter how broken your heart is," her voice filled with a strength that came from deep within, "you are not invisible. You are powerful, and the world needs your voice. Because sometimes the most powerful thing someone can leave behind isn't a title or a salary. It's the pride of a daughter who looks at her mother again with new eyes." 3 years later, Sarah Martinez Mitchell was internationally recognized as one of the most important defenders of immigrant workers' rights in Latin America. The Brave Mothers Foundation operated in 12 countries and had helped over 5,000 families. Emma had won a full scholarship to study international relations at Northwestern University. In her application essay, she had written, "I want to be like my mother, someone who uses her voice to amplify the voices of those who cannot speak." Robert Harrison had served 2 years in prison and now worked as a supervisor in one of the construction companies that had been intervened by the corporate ethics program. He earned a modest salary and had learned to treat his employees with respect. not because he had really changed, but because he knew Sarah was watching. James Mitchell had become Sarah's main partner in an international consultancy that helped investors identify ethical opportunities in emerging markets. And every year, on March 15th, on the anniversary of the day, a wrong delivery worker entered a conference room. Sarah organized a special ceremony, not to celebrate her own transformation, but to remember that on every corner, in every office, in every corner of the city, there's someone invisible waiting for their moment to shine. Because in the end, Sarah's story wasn't just about a woman who recovered her voice. It was about all the voices that were waiting to be heard, and about the moment when we decide to stop being invisible.